Welcome to Citizens Forum. Today for our first segment, we have with us Jack Anderson. Jack is the owner of Green Plan. He's a sustainable planner and the designer of ecologically sustainable structures. So welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you very much.
So when did you get started on this path, and what was the main reasons for you to get involved in green buildings?
I studied in a environmentally focused architectural program in the mid-1970s. As a consequence of that program, I became familiar with climate change and the importance of creating sustainable alternatives if we wanted to ensure this planet would be as comfortable for our future generations as it has been for us. That led to me getting involved in the architectural world, and I designed my first passive solar house in 1985.
Well, that's very interesting. And, you know, I saw a few weeks ago a picture of this new biofiber building block that is being used. What is the unique aspects of this new type of building block do you think people should be so interested in?
Well, this is very exciting for me, Walter. The use of hemp and lime as a mixture has been around for a millennium. In fact, you'll find the mixture in the pyramids and the Great Wall of China. So it's not like we've come up with something new. What is very unique about it is that the brilliant inventor, former contractor, Mac Radford of the Just Biofiber company, had recognized how to utilize this and had developed a internal structure within the blocks that would allow it to be modulated so that we could move forward with construction. So that was the first step that made it very unique. It begins to work in our typical construction technologies. The block itself has amazing principles to it. It has a very high insulative resistance. The actual numbers are still being tested to confirm, but we're looking at likely somewhere around R40 for a 10-inch block, substantially greater than current technologies. The block breathes, which means that we don't need vapor barriers on the interior of it as well, which is another key aspect. It is structurally stronger than concrete. It absorbs carbon dioxide in its lifespan. So when we look at the growing of the hemp, it's absorbing carbon dioxide during that stage, and then the actual block will absorb carbon dioxide over the 100 years as it becomes stronger during that period of time. The product is soundproof, the product is fireproof. There's a number of aspects about it that give it a advantage over other building technologies.
So what is life expectancy of a building that will be built with this type of building block?
Well, very unique to this block is that it doesn't even reach its maximum strength until 100 years from now, because the carbon is being absorbed into it, and so it effectively is moving towards closer to limestone. So we're anticipating that we could have buildings that could last hundreds of years. And if we look at the Great Wall of China as an example, you know, it's been around for millennium. So we're very encouraged, but until we have the time to see how long it lasts, we really can't answer that question definitively.
Can you envision any downsides, you know, structurally for using this type of building material?
Structurally, not so much. I mean, the internal structure within the core of it is the real unique aspect of it as to how it comes together. Unique to this is that hemp and lime as a mixture is one of the prime building products in France currently right now. But that's done more like a cob or a straw bale in terms of just packing in the product. And so in this situation, with the internal structure, we can modulate it. It actually goes together like a Lego block, like kids' Lego, and it has amazing structural strength. Currently, it's estimated that with some of the internal struts, we could stack it 8 stories high. And it will hold, and it supports itself. So it is very, very strong. Stronger than concrete, in fact.
This is all good news, I think. How available is the hemp fiber itself? Is it going to be readily available for use for building?
Well, that might be the only downfall to it currently is that we have a massive demand for the product already without really any promotions. I was fortunate to be connected to the Just Biofiber company and was working on a home for Arno and Linda Koininen, who I consider sustainability pioneers in this community. And so I was able to speak to the Just Biofiber people about being able to use the product on their place, which is the first residence on the planet out in Souk. So the circumstances is just from that presentation and what people are seeing, and there's been a couple of TV articles about it, the demand is growing exponentially, and yet we can't produce the blocks, or the Just Biofiber company can't produce the blocks fast enough yet. So there's a lot of interest now in growing industrial hemp. Another key aspect to understanding about this, Walt, is that the industrial hemp has lots of use for the seed, for the fiber, whether it's making canvas or other products out of it. But the core of it is the husk of it, if you will, and that component is considered the waste product for all other uses of it. So we're actually closing the circle in terms of the actual full use of the plant now. So it's very exciting in that sense. There's nothing will be left of industrial hemp that can't be used in one market or another.
That's quite remarkable. Now, how are the building authorities and the inspectors viewing this product? Are they having any trouble with accepting it?
You know, that's always a challenge when you come out with something new, and I can tell you that the nature of the BC Building Code is such that you have a variety of products that are listed that you can use, and when you come forward with a product that isn't recognized, then the building inspectors must require professionals to review and take responsibility for that. So specifically the structure of the building and the building membrane are required to be certified by a professional engineer that it is considered suitable for construction.
So the engineers themselves are not having any problem with this at this point?
We've been able to speak to a number of different engineers that are exploring it, and there's been a lot of study and research in the product as they're exploring things. Just to give you an example, they're currently running tests where they're putting a constructed structure of Just Biofiber blocks on a shaker, and they're shaking it to a Richter scale 9 now, and they're finding that the blocks are not separating in any way. In fact, the foundation that supported it crumbled out from underneath it, and the blocks actually bridged over portions that had collapsed.
That's remarkable. And
Yeah,
that's
very
great,
exciting.
Great news that it's that resilient. You know, I'm an electrician, and I'm always interested in new materials, but I always wonder, where are we going to put the wire in these building blocks?
Well, the internal core of it has some holes that are drilled right through. It's actually part of the molds in which the block is made, and so we are actually running that as the conduit for electrical, and then we can cut in an electrical box at any location there. Likewise, we can also cut in with simple drill and or reciprocating saw, skill saws, etc. We can cut in our plumbing on the external wall. Because of the R value, we're not becoming less than the effective requirements of the BC Building Code for insulation.
So once you have your systems installed, what's placed on the surfaces of the building block itself to finish the block?
Well, it's very unique. As I mentioned earlier, the product breathes, and a critical component to that is the use of lime plaster. So we use a lime plaster on the inside, which has all kinds of opportunities for artistic expression. And there's some really neat things that you can find on the internet around eco walls and such. On the exterior, which is where we're concerned with the waterproofing of it, we use a lime stucco, and so the product will breathe, and it will breathe in a temperate environment, in an Arctic environment, in a desert environment, or in a rainy part of the world like we experience here. So it's very exciting on that front.
So when you say a building is breathing, how much can you calculate how much air is exchanged, or how do you factor how much movement there is from the exterior to the interior, or vice versa?
There's been some extensive hygrothermal testing of it that speak to that. There's a substantive report that is quite complex, and I would encourage people to check that out on the Just Biofiber website. The nature of it there is to quantify that. It would be beyond me to say, but it's exciting because it gives us some opportunities to explore different alternatives. We may not need to be considering using heat recovery ventilator inside because of the ability to breathe, and we don't have any concerns specifically with elements like mold, because the breathability and the combination of lime actually prohibits the mold from being a problem within the structure.
So lime also is a very old building product used in construction. So there was a tour of some homes, this home particularly in Souk. Do you think those folks will be offering any other tours of their home?
I've got to say that I have a vast admiration for Arno and Linda Koinen, and sustainable pioneers, really, and the unique nature of many of the green residences that I've designed in my career, as I mentioned, dating back to 1985, in excess of 500 homes that I've been involved in, is that most are very private people, and so they don't showcase this. But Arno and Linda are different, and Arno has been involved in the Electric Car Club here in Victoria for years, and it's very important to him when he spoke to me that he wanted to make sure that people could come, witness what their home was like, and to also be able to replicate that. That's the best way to change people's attitudes, is to show them the positive alternative.
Oh, I really
so
believe
there will
that.
be numerous opportunities, I anticipate, of various open houses that Arno will be prepared to showcase the technology, and he's already developed an amazing blog to talk about the construction of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important to share the knowledge. And then people, when they see that something is achievable, I mean, they're much more likely to do it themselves. Those first few folks are very brave to break that ground and to show that it actually is achievable. Now, one of the things that's always an issue, of course, is cost of putting a building up.
Right.
And these days, putting buildings up are getting more and more expensive. So how does this using the biofiber building block compare with, say, using a standard 2x6 wall system and insulation and all that?
Well, that was where I expected to see some challenges, but the calculations that have been done on that is it's actually comparable to conventional building construction now, using standard 2x6 framing with extra insulation on the outside. But because you don't have vapor barriers, because with the waterproofing on the outside you don't have rain screen, etc., we're actually looking at it being possibly slightly less per square foot than it is to build with conventional 2x6 framing.
Well, that's very interesting. So, as we're just going to wrap up for today, I want to thank you very much for coming in and sharing this with us. And we hope that this home is successful. And perhaps we'll have you on sometime in the future to look back at this project, and maybe you'll be bringing some future, innovations to us.
Well, I thank you very much. I'm always happy to share my passion for sustainability, and hoping that others catch on to the importance of it for the sake of our future generations. Thank you.
So that wraps up this segment of Citizens Forum.
Welcome back. It's segment 2 of Citizens Forum. It's Wednesday, November the 22nd. I'd like to start by thanking the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes this program happen every 2 weeks. The guest in this segment is Eric Doherty, and we're going to be talking about a very important issue, which is transportation.
Thanks for having me on, Jack.
Thanks for coming on, Eric. You're a member of the Better Transit Alliance, and maybe question number 1, what is the Better Transit Alliance? Which sounds like a very good idea.
Yeah, the Better Transit Alliance of Greater Victoria is a new grassroots group. And we look at improving the transit system both for social justice reasons, climate justice reasons, and also just to make the region a nicer place to live. And we're finding that there's a lot of support for that, for all three of those points.
Well, I think there should be. Those are three very, very important issues. You wanted to talk about something that is happening or is going to happen, which is the Douglas and Highway Number 1 bus lane proposal, which I don't even know what the proposal is.
Yeah, well, I think it's fascinating to me that there's been so little coverage, so little media attention on this very important project. It's already under construction to a small degree. The Mackenzie interchange, all that construction out there, most of that construction is about making space for more cars, but a small amount of that is actually to put shoulder bus lanes on one side of the highway. The proposal is to take bus lanes from downtown Victoria out to View Royal and Colwood. There's already the sections in Victoria have been approved. The section in Saanich has been approved, and a small section out on the highway, which is going to be a shoulder bus lane, something we haven't seen in this region yet. That's been approved. The Victoria piece and the Saanich piece are out to tender right now. We're waiting to see what the price will be when they come back. We're hoping that they'll be within the amount of money that's available, but we don't know that.
Do you know how much money is available?
No, I don't know exactly, but it's, in the scheme of things for transportation, it's a very small amount of money. If you look at what's being spent on what has been spent on the McTavish interchange, the Mackenzie interchange, all the construction going on in the Malahat, all these things being done to facilitate more and more single occupancy vehicles, what's being spent on transit is very small. The interesting thing with this proposal is that there's a low cost, high benefit portion that hasn't been funded yet. And that's the shoulder bus lanes out on the highway to complete the bus lanes out to the 6 Mile Pub area.
Okay.
And because it's on the side of a highway, all they're doing is widening the shoulder for buses. The cost is really quite low. The construction can be very quick, and there's no design questions. There's no tricky questions about street trees and bike lanes and all this thing. It's a highway. You build the bus lane the way you've done it on other highways like Highway 99 in Richmond.
So in other words, these buses will run right alongside the traffic on Highway Number 1 going out to
just like they do
Western communities.
Yeah, and they'll do it just like they do on Highway 99 in Richmond, where there's years ago a shoulder bus lane was built, and we know it works quite well because I've ridden on it on the 620 that goes up to the ferry, and it's effective and inexpensive and quick to build.
Well, from my perspective, I've thought for a long time the day of the car is dead. But, I thought that a long time ago, and obviously I was wrong for a long, long time. But certainly now, given the environmental catastrophe that we can no longer escape no matter what we do, the time of the car has at least got to be declining a little bit. So anything we can do for public transit is a good thing, as long as we're doing smart stuff. And we can, like, what I'd like to see starting tomorrow when we have a new government is using the ENN to run commuter rail from Langford into downtown. And you mentioned, do you mind if I bring this up?
Sure.
Yeah, you mentioned that the new bridge that is going to go in does have an extra lane, and you think that lane can handle light rail.
I would say that that bridge is it's a modern bridge. Most modern bridges can handle light rail. It's just the fact is that the loading of a heavily loaded semi truck is not much different than a light rail vehicle. So it's, I don't know about the engineering on this particular bridge, but I know in general, you usually can lay a track down and run it across a bridge that wasn't originally intended for light rail. But that's for light urban rail.
Yeah.
This is not the kind of trains that would be going up to Nanaimo.
No.
But I think the thing is, to me, the key is that we've had decades of promises of improved transit. For decades, we've been promising transit riders that they would no longer be stuck in traffic in the Colwood Crawl. And once we get those bus lanes built and seeing that transit riders are actually being given priority, I think we're going to see more people getting onto transit, and also a political shift from the cynicism and kind of do nothing, the idea that we can't do anything, that nothing will be done, to this idea that, hey, yes, we can make these choices. We can decide that transit is the priority and get things done quickly. I think the ENN is a challenging, it's a challenging question. Single track, something that hasn't been, urban transit on single track has not been done in British Columbia. It's not something that, or not recently in British Columbia.
I've heard it can be done fairly easily, but I could be wrong. But I think it can be done.
It can be done, but it's not as easy as some people think it is to do well. Right. Ottawa has the O train, and they did an upgrade to it to increase the frequency, and it didn't work. It was still a good transit service, but it didn't work quite as well as what people thought it or hoped.
Well, whatever, I think the impetus should be, as you just said, moving money away from roads and cars and burning oil, which we can no longer do, and into public transit.
Yeah, and et
cetera.
And once we make that shift of money, things like the question of what do buses run on? Why shouldn't we be spending a little bit more and moving to electric buses of various kinds? Doing the early experiments, being a leader in North America rather than a follower on the shift away from fossil fuels in public transit. That's something that, it's something that we could do. That's a role we could take on, is once we've got bus lanes, buses no longer stuck in traffic, think about why shouldn't they be electric?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
And the interesting thing for me, too, is that our provincial and federal governments have already committed to shift money away from road building to public transit as part of the climate framework that they signed in December. So it's, almost a year ago they signed this. So Christy Clark signed a framework, the climate framework that it's just commonly known as the Federal Provincial Climate Agreement.
Oh, yes.
And in the transportation section, it says that they commit to spend less money on things that increase climate pollution, like road building.
Christy Clark signed that?
She signed it. She may
not
not
the same Christy Clark who was going to spend $4 billion on the Massey Bridge.
Oh, yes.
I mean, my God.
I'm not saying that she read it.
Really.
But you see, the history in Canada of climate agreements is that politicians draft really quite good agreements. They sign them, and then they ignore them. It's only when people read the agreements and get active and push the politicians and say, you signed this. We agree with this. Let's do it. What are you doing to make this happen? And that's where I think we can get the real shift. We've got a green NDP government in place that's going to be very susceptible to that pressure. And also the federal government has shown that where municipal governments and regional districts are clear about what they don't want, the federal government often won't fund it. The prime example of that is the Massey Bridge to replace the Massey Tunnel. The regional district said they did not want that. The federal government refused to fund it. And going back a few years, the Port Mann Bridge, the same thing happened. The regional district voted against it. They voted to strongly oppose it. And the federal government refused to fund it.
So it was all built with provincial money.
It's all built with provincial money,
very
and
interesting.
that left a bunch of federal money available for other transit projects in Metro Vancouver.
Right, right. If there was a bus lane coming in, I think you said around 6 Mile Pub? That would be
That's where the easy part starts. There's a bridge beyond that, and then it's urban,
More
View
difficult.
Royal, more difficult.
From around there, would there be like express buses coming off at different points to connect with I don't know where?
Well, the thing is that that bus lane is actually well set up for a present bus network.
Okay.
There are some buses that branch off, for example, to go to the hospital.
Yeah, something like that. Or maybe, well, they almost have express buses out to the university. Maybe they even do.
Well, they have buses that, well, for example, that the number 50 is one of the busiest buses in the region. It just goes straight up and down the highway and then through Colwood to Langford.
Eric, we're out of time. I really, really hope we start moving towards better public transit. If we don't, well, we have to. There's no question about it. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. And we're always looking for new members, so if your listeners are interested in getting involved, just check our website and get in contact.
Please put the website up one more. There it is. Thank you very much for watching this segment of Citizens Forum.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Eric. That was great.
On a sunny afternoon on November 22nd, 1963, my grade 3 school teacher walked into the classroom and she dismissed the class. And she told us that the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, had been assassinated. And I went home and I turned on the TV like everybody else in North America did. And our stunned family watched those first images of that death, and we knew that our lives and our worldview was changed forever. So today we have with us Beau Filter. Beau is the author of The Causes of the Wars of Aggression, and Beau's also an expert on the Kennedy assassination. And we're just going to look over some of the evidence around who was behind this assassination and the forces of evil that were behind his death. Welcome to the show, Beau.
Well, thank you for having me on.
So I see you brought some great literature in. I think perhaps we should just go over some of the books that you would suggest we should look at when we're examining what happened on that day.
Well, that's a good idea because a lot of people haven't really researched it, and they kind of question what's gone on in the media over all these years. But here we are now today, exactly 54 years later, and still the media is trying to make out everybody who has the capacity to draw a question mark to be some sort of a crank. And in fact, last year, Mark Lane, one of the best booksellers, he wrote this book here, Plausible Denial.
Could you just hold that up just like in front of your chest and
Oh,
get a
okay.
look at it?
Plausible Denial. Was the CIA involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy? Well, he has lots of evidence for it, and it's like an octopus with 1,000 legs instead of 80, and all of them lead with very hard evidence. Those legs right back up to the CIA, but all of the obfuscation tries to point to Lee Harvey Oswald, but all we have on him is evidence that keeps showing that he's being sheep-dipped, which is a CIA term for making him to look like he's the killer. And of course now one thing people don't realize is that after all these years, did he ever get tried in court? No, but he did testify. He testified when they were dragging him through the halls.
That's right.
And what did he say? What was his testimony? Do you remember?
Yes.
I'm just a patsy. That's his testimony. Then he's dead. Well, that's the end of that story, because the media went to work immediately. And, you know, the sheep dipping apparatus, where they make him go to Mexico City, make him look like he's working for the KGB, and he's a nutcase and all this, and they know all about him. And so they had to pin that on him. And right away, J. Edgar Hoover said, we've got to get grab evidence right away to make it look like he's the lone killer. And then, of course, all the evidence is about all the different shots that were ringing out around there. In fact, Walter Cronkite was the first to announce that it sounds like 3 volleys of what sounded like semi-automatic rifle fire rang out in Dallas today. And then the next day it was all gone.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden it was 3 shots, and then as they had to sharpen it down, then it became a magic bullet. And so, you know, it just gets crazier as time goes on. But here we are 54 years later,
To the
and
day.
the character assassinations of people who have written books like Plausible Denial. Here's one from the New York Times. It says, Mark Lane, early Kennedy assassin, conspiracy theorist. You see, this is a term that the CIA made up in '67 because Oliver Stone, no, not Oliver Stone, but Jim Garrison was writing his book, and that's this book right here. Everybody, this is a great book for everyone to sink your teeth in. You think fiction is fun to read. This is a non-stopper. You can't put it down. On the Trail of the Assassins. And
Jim Garrison was the prosecutor that brought Clay Shaw. He charged Clay Shaw
as one of the conspirators.
in the and that helped direct the assassination.
That's right, Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans, and the jury found that Garrison was correct, that there was a conspiracy to kill Kennedy, but they hung it upside down so that the press could now see Garrison's lost his whole case. And what they did is they threw the case out on an imaginary technicality. They were linking Clay Shaw to the CIA, and the link was when he was booked down at the police headquarters, and he gave an alias of Clay Bertrand, which was his CIA name.
Yeah.
And so that married him to the CIA. And then when Garrison tried to bring him up under that charge in the courtroom, the judge called him up there and threw it out and says, I'm not going to allow you to use that as evidence because there wasn't a lawyer present when he was asked about aliases. No one is ever asked to have an attorney present when they're being brought in for questioning.
Yeah.
So it was a total fake way of throwing the case out.
Clay Shaw was on the board of directors of Permindex, and also, which was closely associated with the World Trade Mart.
Yes.
And these are the entities that invited Kennedy to Dallas, Texas that day.
That's correct.
So one could say perhaps that was just a coincidence, and others might say maybe there is a conspiracy, something was happening.
Well, you have to understand that all these people are affiliated to the military-industrial complex. And John Kennedy was doing something that was going to end all of their careers. During World War II, a lot of people got really rich on World War II. They made arms, like Henry Ford made arms for Hitler as well as the Allies, and he was a great hero after the war. And a lot of other people made fortunes too, and they weren't going to go home and start baking bread again after the fortunes they made in World War II. And Kennedy, he made it very clear in his NSAM, National Security Action Memorandum 263, that he was going to pull the first advisors out, 1,000 of them, by Christmas in 1963, and that he'd bring all the troops home by the end of 1965. That's the end of the party.
For the Vietnam War.
And they said, no, thank you. You're a dead man walking.
Yeah.
And so immediately when he was killed, Johnson's installed, and then Johnson immediately retracts 263 and writes 273, and it gives the CIA their war in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And not only that, 9 months later, what did we have? The Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Johnson sitting there, it's a ghost ship with ghost torpedoes. It was a lie that these torpedoes were launched against the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin, but he used it as a pretext to launch all-out bombings on North Vietnam.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of an introduction to the flipping of what they did after Kennedy was heading for a peaceful America.
And then we slid into the last 50 years of perpetual war and perpetual aggression by the United States, perpetrated against dozens of countries around the globe, and they're still holding themselves up as being the bringers of democracy and freedom.
Right.
And then we're supposed to buy all that. Now I want you to see but got a couple other books here. I want you to show us those titles so we don't forget to show this.
Well, I mentioned Plausible Denial, On the Trail of the Assassins, and then Jim Marr's book, which is really another one. It really details the assassination. And in there, for example, he'll tell you that 103 people, witnesses or people that knew intimately about the assassination, died under strange circumstances within the next 4 years afterwards. Some people were very close to the assassination, and there's so many details. I take notes on it as I go along, but the names that they tie into here is just remarkable.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I say there's 1,000 legs to this octopus, and it goes deep and wide, deep into the CIA.
Yeah.
But another one that's really important, I didn't bring a copy of it, is a book titled JFK, Vietnam, the CIA, and the Plot to Assassinate John F. Kennedy. And it's written by Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty. And that's a book that everybody should absolutely read, because he is not just an investigator. He's at the top. He works for Kennedy, and he works for he's working in the Pentagon, and he works with the Chief Joints of Staff. And he co-penned NSMA, the National Security Action Memorandum 263 of Kennedy to remove all the troops from Vietnam. And so he was right there on the scene. Now, what is really interesting about him is that he was always very involved in the protection of Kennedy. And 10 days before, he was sent to the South Pole on a diplomatic chore that he would never have been involved with. And he was sent there by Colonel Lansdale, who's been working for the CIA, who was pictured in Dallas that day. And he's one of the head mechanics of CIA secret operations, which the Frank Church Senate Committee findings during 1975 found that the CIA, up until that point from 1947 to 75, had already conducted 13,000 covert operations. And covert is an euphemism for illegal. They're
Right.
crimes.
That's
13,000 crimes by 1975.
Yeah.
And the hit on Kennedy was just one of many.
All in the name of national security.
National security, yeah, and that takes me to what I like to dub now what I call the uniperspective.
Yeah.
The uniperspective, all of it is easy for the media to push their agenda because it comes down to 4 words: evil East, angelic West. Under that umbrella, everything is there. If you're in the media and you write outside the umbrella of those 4 words, you're going to find yourself on the street. And there's even a university in California that has a website dedicated to all of the journalists that get knocked off if they dare to go out from underneath this umbrella.
It opens up a Pandora's box. And then we have
That's right.
one last book that you brought in, and I'm going to hold this one up. It's The Devil's Chessboard, written by David Talbot, and it's all about Allen Dulles and his cronies, who were many, and all the things that they were involved in. I think you said you might be able to read us a quote out of that.
Well, I think it's very valuable to do that. First of all, he's talking the Devil's Chessboard. He dubs Alan Dulles as the Satan in this book. Now, this is only published 2 years ago, so it's an accumulation. And like I'm saying, 54 years. All we're getting is more and more people coming in and digging up incredible evidence. But here's let's see how many pages we are. I'm going to quote to you something on the very last page. The page is 620. You don't have to read the whole book, but here's something that's worthwhile to hear. Now, he's painted a picture of Alan Dulles as the Satan running these. He's a head mechanic in the CIA hit on Kennedy. They don't spend a ton of time on that. But one of the disciples that is named heavily in the Kennedy assassination is one of Alan Dulles' disciples. His name is James Jesus Angleton. So if your staff can get a picture of him, that would be worth dubbing in over this, because I'm going to quote the disciple, James Jesus Angleton. And here's what he says on the very last page. Now, he's dying, and when you're on your deathbed, you tend to confess about things. And so David Talbot is actually interviewing, and here's what he quotes. He says, fundamentally, the founding fathers of U.S. intelligence were liars. The better you lied and the more you betrayed, the more likely you would be promoted. Outside of their duplicity, the only thing they had in common was a desire for absolute power. I did things, in looking back on my life, I regret. But I was part of it, and I loved being in it. If you were in a room with them, you were in a room full of people that you have to believe would deservedly end up in hell. I guess I will see them there soon. So here is one of the mechanics admitting that the U.S. foreign policy is run by a satanic cult. And that's why the Devil's Chessboard is just just one of the books, the tip of the iceberg of the incredible story of what's evolved in the Kennedy assassination. So yes, now we have permanent wars. Cheney was bragging about the permanent war. It's all about permanent profit. He mentions, I quote, absolute power. Well, absolute power means absolute money. And when the taxpayers pay for the military, pay for the weapons, and then the weapons are sold on the international market, and all the profit that's brought in is pocketed by these people, that's called a racket. It's nothing different from a mafia racket where the taxpayers pay the whole thing. They send their sons to die in the wars, and then a handful of people and international bankers that ultimately all of this heads up. The foam of the scum comes to the top, and the international bankers who win are the profiteers ultimately.
So this is food for thought. Bo, I mean, it's remarkable that what's been written, and a lot of it springing out of this assassination. And when the people's quest for the truth, well, I think it can never be extinguished. And you know, your work and so many other people have always kept the candle burning to shine towards that truth, and I really appreciate that. Thank you for coming in today.
Well, you're welcome.
So that wraps up this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to Citizens Forum. We're going to wrap up with the Walt and Jack show, and we just brought in a few clips from the local newspapers and the media, talking about the things that are happening around the world. So what did you bring in for us today, Jack?
Well, actually, the first one is something that never gets mentioned in the media. I don't know if it's been mentioned in the media anywhere in Canada. I don't think I've heard of it. But California is now, and not only now, California has been for many years using fracking wastewater to irrigate their food crops. And this is widespread in California. And that includes organic crops. It seems that under organic rules, you can irrigate with fracking wastewater and it's still organic. I've stopped buying oranges from California because they've started to taste very, very weird. I just stopped buying them.
So what's in fracked water anyway?
I don't know, a variety of poisons. I don't have the names of any of them. But yes, a variety of poisons and toxins.
So this is the water they inject down into these drill holes,
Right.
to lubricate the bits or to do whatever they're doing.
No, the water is mixed with chemicals and then injected into under high pressure into the rock itself
Okay.
to fracture the rock, which is
So
why
they
it's
put
called
that they
fracking.
put that fluid under pressure.
Yeah, yeah. And then a lot of it comes back up, and they have to deal with it. The rest stays down there. They're poisoning massive amounts of water. And they're doing it in British Columbia too. Here's another story the media is not covering, is that around British Columbia, illegal dams have been found, set up by the oil and gas gang to capture water that they can use for fracking. These are, in some cases, fairly major dams with no permits, it seems, no nothing.
applications.
And the public isn't even told. These people are poisoning our water as fast as they can. I'm just waiting for the NDP to get elected. They'll stop it.
Well, the NDP love liquid natural gas idea,
They do.
but they seem to have forgotten about how you get the gas, and that's through fracking. It seems like they have a little problem with their reasoning or their memory. So what else do you have, Jack?
Yeah. CTV National News reported a few days ago that the United States has put North Korea on, I think it's called, the list of state sponsors of terror. So the United States has put them on, and or maybe it was the United Nations that put them, I don't know. But the CTV lady was reading it, and I thought, why don't you mention that the United States is probably the biggest state sponsor of terror? Why is that never mentioned in our society? And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're not. But certainly a lot of people would say they are. A lot of people say they're funding ISIS. And if you happen to Google U.S. funds ISIS, you'll see an amazing array of stories from around the world saying basically that. And yet it never gets into our media. It never gets into our... So the public is kept in the... That's why community television is so important. It lets somebody outside of the corporate world get on television and talk about the news. Community television could, I think, really change this country around if only we could get control of our own community television. Instead, it's being shut down, as you know. It's gone in the major
people
centers.
reread the Iran-Contra scandal. If you look at what the U.S. invasions in Panama and in Nicaragua, in Guatemala, the U.S. involvement in Chile with the political coup, and they ousted democratically elected government there to put in a military dictatorship, a brutal dictatorship that slaughtered thousands of citizens. This is all state-sponsored terrorism by the exact definition. This is not any kind of a theory. It's exactly what's happened. So it is a sad state of affairs when they hold themselves up to being the leaders of the democratic world, when really they're not. They've been bringing dictatorship and pain and suffering all over the planet.
Exactly. And I mean, the fact that that's always kept at a low, is always kept to the side because our media never talk about it.
Yeah.
And the politicians never talk about it. And I don't blame them, because if you're in the media and you start to talk about that, you're not going to be in the media tomorrow.
You're not going to be in the mainstream media, that's for sure.
And where else are you going to make a living, if you're working
Yeah.
there? We've got to build an independent media in our country. Site C, what's the NDP going to do?
Boy, that's a tough one, Jack. Some people are saying the NDP are going to approve Site C.
Yeah, it's sounding...
And the argument, the economic argument for Site C dam is very, very flimsy. And if you look at the true books of the BC Hydro and their record, they're just simply, we know we're being lied to about Site C on the economic issues, but on the other values, particularly the land use values and flooding such valuable farmland that could be vital to feeding British Columbians. If you look at the issues around sovereignty, around issues around First Nations, it's a sad day if the NDP go ahead and approve Site C Dam. They have absolutely no reason to, other than bowing to what has been referred to as the shadow government. This mysterious forces that are acting upon issues like this that we seem to be helpless in defending ourselves from.
There should be a criminal investigation of Site C, because BC Hydro basically faked the numbers from the beginning, and the public was never told. If we had known the honest numbers from the beginning, how BC Hydro twisted everything, it never would have gone ahead. But we're talking billions of our dollars here taken.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the Green Party seemed to have negotiated a deal with the NDP, saying that if they went ahead with that dam, that wasn't going to be a deal breaker in their coalition.
Yeah, I mean, why bother? Why bother? Because what are you going to get? Re-elect the Liberals?
Why
it's
make
hopeless.
a deal? Why make a deal in any way? And particularly when the whole issue around the proportional representation referendum, and that's a very tricky thing that could happen to us, and very treacherous political ground we're in there. And if the Greens are just resting their laurels on that, they might have a sad day to wake up to in the future.
But I think you and I both support proportional representation, yes?
Oh, absolutely. But I think, given the history of what can happen in British Columbia, and the NDP are not immune to some pretty major shenanigans, we are really walking on eggshells here, whether or not we're going to get a fair analysis and a fair presentation of proportional representation, and also a fair question on the ballot. I'm really worried that something's going to happen there, and we're going to end up with another government with another fake majority ramming through whatever policies they want.
Yeah, it's a risk for sure. Fish farms?
Well,
Why don't they close the fish farms? We're out of time?
We're going to have to wrap up.
I'm just going to say that following this segment, there's going to be a short video of a Skype interview done with an American expert on Site C.
You said that BC Hydro and the Liberal government had misled citizens about the cost numbers from the very beginning because they use a different costing formula than every other public utility in North America. What did you mean by that?
Okay, well, that's pretty straightforward. There is a methodology for costing projects that's used elsewhere in Canada and throughout the US and elsewhere in the world called the Levelized Cost of Energy, LCOE, and it has a specific formula for the computations. And when you check into studies at the National Energy Board or at its corresponding agency in the US, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or any of the other similar agencies, you'll see that term, LCOE. It's also used on Wall Street. British Columbia Hydro uses a term called UEC. And until recently, we didn't even know what the formula for UEC was. And in fact, we only saw that during the recent proceeding. The UEC calculations are very different than everyone else's. And so we've had a terrible time on the apples to apples comparisons. But with the BCUC final study that came out just a few weeks ago, we now actually do have apples to apples. The BCUC recommended strongly eliminating the BC Hydro special UEC formula and has determined that there is no cost advantage to Site C over the alternatives. My own position is stronger. I believe there is a significant cost advantage to the alternatives. But the BCUC, the British Columbia regulators, have been very conservative, which is completely appropriate.
If the Site C goes ahead, for many years after the Site C dam is built, the BC Hydro electricity produces electricity and would have to sell it at a loss. What do you suppose will be the magnitude of those losses in the future?
Well, fairly large. The first thing to understand is that the cost of Site C using the LCOE formula comes out to about $100 per megawatt hour. The current market in the US, the largest energy market in the world, is right across the Washington border. It's called Mid-Columbia, is $22. So the loss would be $78 per megawatt hour. Now that changes year to year, and forecasts, of course, change year to year. But it's an enormous differential. The difficulty we're having is a pretty simple one. Number one, we don't have a lot of load growth, so we have more supply chasing fewer customers. Two, we have a lot of load growth in renewables like wind and solar that have a zero marginal cost. Once you build them, they produce and you don't have to buy their fuel. That's also driving down the cost. The major fuel used in electricity is natural gas. As you know, we have natural gas coming out our ears. The forecasts of natural gas are such that the price is forecasted to fall for the next 4 years and then stay stable out until 2029 or 2030. That's a pretty heavy burden. So this is not a good time to start exporting high-priced electricity. And that's a problem facing all of the Canadian Crown corporations. We see it in Quebec, we see it in Newfoundland, we see it in Manitoba. And frankly, it's a problem throughout the entire industry. The price of energy is very, very low at the moment. You may have noticed some good news at the gas pump over the last few years. It's the same situation in electricity.
Don't get me started about the price of the gas pump.
Well, there's some other issues there, but the point of the matter is we're in the midst of having an enormous bounty of oil and natural gas, but also renewable resources. So the overall wholesale prices have been falling sharply.
So thanks for watching Citizens Forum, and we'll see you next week.